Hi everyone, today we are going to finish our perspectives on personality. So we have already covered the trait perspective, the the humanistic perspective, and the psychodynamic perspective. I know what's happening. Just kidding. I don't even know what day it is. But we're gonna finish with our fourth perspective, which is the social cognitive perspective on personality. So, real quick refresher, what's the social cognitive theory? It's that basic concept that we act the way we do because of how we see other people act. So, if you remember, the images are from the Bobo doll experiment with Arthur Bandura. You show a kid a video of someone beating up the doll, and then they do the same thing. And I can testify that is true. Okay. So the social cognitive theory argues that there are three major influences that affect your personality based on the environment you're in. Okay. Now, the official term is called reciprocal determinism. It's just saying that actions are affected by your own personality as well as the environment that you're in. So you can have your own internal personality, but that may shift and change based on where you are. So remember, it's kind of like the social cultural theory perspective when you act a different way based on where you are because you feel more comfortable or you feel on edge. Okay, so bringing it back to reciprocal determinism, there are three major influences. The three influences are your thoughts, your environment, and your behavior. So your thoughts is how do you perceive each situation? What do you think is happening? Your environment, so how does your behavior change in different situations? Is it a safe environment? Is it an unsafe environment? Is it a new environment? Is it a familiar environment? And then the last one, your behavior, is how do elements of the situation affect your actual behavior. So it's about how you feel or how your thoughts on what you think is happening, how comfortable you feel on what's happening, and then your behavior in response to that, and how that shifts. The big concept that has to do with social cognitive theory is that concept of personal control. How much control do you have over situations? And they come up with that concept of the locus of control, your understanding of what controls you. If you have an external locus, you think that your fate is determined by others. Chance, forces outside of your control. It just is what it is because that's what happens. If you have an internal locus, you control your own fate, like Merida from Disney's Brave. Yeah. Those with an internal focus are more likely to be less depressed, more healthy, higher achievers in school, independent, better at dealing with stress, because they do feel that they have control, which also means if they don't like what's happening, they're more likely to take efforts to fix it. If you think that the situation you're in sucks because of everything else and there's nothing you can do about it, you kind of just sit there and you wallow in the situation versus focusing on what you can change or what you can do. That doesn't mean necessarily that people with an external locus will not do anything to change their fate. These are the people who really like Lucky Charms, like myself. You guys know about Lucky Charms, not the cereal that's magically delicious, but things like having a rabbit's foot, which is actually kind of horrible. Getting that penny, heads up, don't pick it up if it's heads down, heads up, good luck. Finding that 4-leaf clover. A very popular one in sports is having like lucky socks or lucky shorts, to the unfortunate end of your teammates, where if you wash them, then the luck will disappear, so you don't wash them all season. It is gross. So, here's on the slide some general statements to figure out where you kind of fall in it. So what two statements? Two. So you have to pick two that you most agree with. Number one, there's no reason to vote in an election. Your vote doesn't really count. Number 2, one person can make a difference in the way elected representatives think. 3, when you try to get a job, it's not what you know that matters, but who you know. And 4, if you want to be a success, it depends on hard work, not luck. So which 2 do you prefer or agree with the most? Okay. And can you figure out which ones are external and internal? Okay. So external is if you like 1 and 3. Internal is if you like 2 and 4. If you liked a different chance than that, you're a variety. Congratulations. So that's one of the big concepts of social cognitive, that sense of control. With that control, you can also have the next concept, which is learned helplessness, which has in psychology been turned into learned optimism in terms of a treatment. So learned helplessness is the hopeless feeling when an animal or a person can't avoid repeated bad events. There's been lots of studies on this, unfortunately. Some of them are very famous. There's a dog experiment where they basically take dogs and they put them in areas that have a fence that they can jump over. And they make it a high fence, and basically they shock the dogs every time they try to jump. And then when the fence is lowered to where they could easily jump over, they don't, because they've learned that they can't do it. Similar to elephants in the few circuses that still have them for a very long time, or you could see it in the movie Dumbo, where they put the chain around the elephant's foot and it stays there. It's a stake in the ground. An elephant can rip it out. The way they train them is they do it when they're very little so that they can't rip it out. So by the time they're big enough to do that, they don't, because they've learned that it's not going to be able to do anything. It is important to note that there's no guaranteed factor in that, because in all of those types of information and data, you do have elephants that eventually run around the street, and there were always dogs that no matter what you did, they just kept jumping. And that kind of gives that concept that while the majority of people could deal with learned helplessness, there is an internal factor in it. The other example is obviously convicts in prison, and that has to do with how prison is run. If it's being run for simple punishment, you wind up with that convicts being released and coming right back because they feel like they should just be in prison because there's nothing better they can do, versus the types of prisons that have big programs in terms of job training and access to education, where they feel that there's going to be a chance when they get out to do something better. If you remember the Stanford Prison Experiment, watching that, that's a good example of learned helplessness, where in less than 2 weeks, kids were being abused by other of their classmates, and they just took it. So with that concept, you've gotten a development in positive psychology, which, remember, is studying how happy people and how to make them happy and how they thrive. And they're trying to push for learned optimism, so teaching people how to think on the good side. And for that, they come up with, you either have an optimistic explanatory style or a pessimistic explanatory style. And it's just how you explain a situation. So optimistic is, coronavirus, we're stuck inside because we're all listening to the mandates and understanding the science that this will help people prevent the illness from spreading at a rapid pace, and it's going to save a lot of lives. Versus pessimistic, we are stuck inside because we have no control over our life, and the government tells us everything we need to do, and we just have to follow it because there's no hope. One of those is optimistic, and one of those is pessimistic, and one of those will give you hope, and one of those will not help at all. Okay. So what's interesting is when you look at the social cognitive theory, it actually has had a lot of implications on just the general workforce. It's used a lot in that concept of being able to assess behavior before situations in which they would be in that high stress event. You've seen a lot of experiments created to determine how someone like the shows What Would You Do, and they do something terrible and people find out where it's not a real event. And I'm sure many of you hate that show because you were yelling at the people like, just get up and go help them. But that's not a new concept. It's been used for a very long time. We use how people have acted in fake situations or model situations in order to determine how they'll act in those real situations. Easy examples are things like student teaching, Mr. Famosi, going to the police academy, or apprenticeships. And you're able to identify before they're in the situation on whether or not they'll succeed or fail, or what are the likelihood that they'll succeed or fail. Okay. So when you look at the social cognitive perspective, obviously some strengths. There's an objective scientific approach. You can do experiments. It does encourage psychologists to include the full situation surrounding behavior. So it's not just about what's internal to you. It's not just about what's happening outside, but it is a mixture. The big weaknesses, it only accounts for learned behavior. So again, that dog who just keeps jumping no matter what, that's an outlier. It's not explained by social cognitive. And also, emotion and biology are not factored in. So how you're feeling at the moment is not considered in that thought process. And biology is also not a factor in terms of like what your hormone levels might be, or your natural instincts as they go. Okay. Because that can affect what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do. Some people are like, yeah, I'd like to pet that snake. And other people are like, no, get it away from me. So that's it for social cognitive. So you've watched this lecture. You can go back to the other ones and do a little review. You can also have them all up and open for lecture notes. And I'd like you to do the quick multiple choice review for the personality unit. You'll have one more assignment in the personality unit next class. But then we are done, and we're finally moving on to disorders, and we'll get to learn about the serial killers. I know you're excited. All right, have a good day.